We will be recording the meeting and we'll share the recording and all the presentations with you afterwards. So here we come to the program. We're in the middle of the welcome and introduction round. Then we will have a first presentation by Maya from Helvetas on becoming an accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund. We will then have a question and answer session specifically dedicated to this presentation, not open questions to the Green Climate Fund. We will have a discussion on this later. Then we will have a second presentation from Nikolai Denisov from Soil Environment Network, and he will talk to us about his experience on proposal writing to the GCF. Then we will have a short break, and then we will have Jörg Klorer from Equilibrium Consulting with us, who will be answering our questions to the Green Climate Fund. He is a real expert on it. And then we will have a third presentation, announced very last minute, on the official engagement of Switzerland with the Green Climate Fund. We are going to be joined later on by Stefan Schwager from the Federal Office of Environment. So with this, I briefly come to the speakers. You see a photo of each of them here. So the first one will be Maya Wolfensberger. As many of you are from Helvetas, you know her. She holds a master's degree in environmental science and also a Master of Advanced Study in Development Cooperation. She's been working for Helvetas since 2017 as an advisor for climate change, and has before worked on resource management and climate change in the private sector. At Helvetas, Maya is responsible for climate finance, climate protection, renewable energies, climate compensations. Then the second speaker will be Nikolai Denisov. He's a co-founder and the deputy director of Soil Environment Network, a non-profit organization based in Geneva. He has a PhD in geography and environmental studies and over 25 years of experience with environmental information, assessment and communication, as well as water, climate change and issues on the conflict environment interface. He has been a long-time collaborator of the UN, the European Union, bilateral assistance, has given bilateral assistance to organizations, and organized and contributed to numerous studies and projects in the field, in particular in Central and Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus, and in the Central Alps. Then for the discussion round, we have Jörg Klorer with us. He is a real expert on the Green Climate Fund. When he sent me what he has been doing over the last year, I was totally amazed. He has been involved in the readiness work to the Green Climate Fund with over 30 countries. He has been strengthening national designated authorities. He has supported the elaboration of 61 concept note and funding proposals to the GCF. He has supported the accreditation of more than 20 direct access entities and international access entities. He gives trainings and capacity building to national designated authorities, direct access entities, project developers, executing entities, etc. And he knows people at the GCF, board members, secretariat, numerous people from various national designated authorities, etc., etc. So he will be the person to answer our questions on how to access the Green Climate Fund. And finally, as I said, we will be joined by Stefan Schwager. He is responsible for environmental financing at the Federal Office of Environment and for the International Climate and Biodiversity Financing and Funds. Since 2013, he is representative in the Global Environmental Facility Executive Council. He has been part of the since the establishment, he has followed the Green Climate Fund. He is currently a board member to the Green Climate Fund and has previously, before joining the Federal Office for Environment, worked in the scientific sector, in the private sector, for the Federal Department of Home Affairs, the EU Commission, the World Bank.
Ja, ich muss das verstehen da. Ich habe schon Mühe zum Nachhören, wie es auf Englisch ist. Weißt du, wenn es knallt, tut mir leid, es geht jetzt bis am 3.
Okay, so this is so far for my presentation. I will be stop sharing my screen and I will now like to hand over to you and hear from each of you who you are, like what is your name, what is your role in your organization, and have you any experience with the Green Climate Fund? Just very, very briefly. So I will start with Jane because you're the first one next to my picture on the screen.
Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Jane Carter. I'm the Director for Program Development here in Nepal, so I'm sitting in Kathmandu. I've just got back after home leave. Well, climate change is a huge issue here in Nepal, obviously, with the Himalayas up there behind me. And there is a lot of interest in the Green Climate Fund. So far, we've not been able to... Ja, es tut mir leid, ich spreche Englisch, oder?
Stefan, can you mute your mic, please? Right, okay.
Yes, so as said, I mean, there is a lot of interest, but so far we haven't had any real involvement in the Green Climate Fund.
Okay, Stefan, so you're next.
My background is in forestry. Well, agriculture and forestry is my first degree. I have a doctorate on community forestry, private tree planting here.
Okay, Stefan, now you're mute.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry, I'm at home and no experience with Climate Fund. I'm writer at Christoffel Blinden Mission, Christian Blind Mission, and there I'm newly engaged with all things which you want to do about acting towards to protect nature and so. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ilse, do you want to go next?
Hello, hi, I'm sorry, and I also just joined, so is it just about introducing ourselves?
Yeah, just say your name, the role, and if you have any experience with the Green Climate Fund so far.
Okay, so Ilse van Rooij, I'm the head of international programs at Solidarmet. We are an NGO involved in projects around health system strengthening in Africa, and no, we're new to this whole area. No.
Okay, Nenad?
Hello everyone, I'm just having my chocolate. My name is Nenad Čelarević. I work for Helvetas Eastern Europe unit as a regional business development coordinator. I am based in Belgrade. I do not have experience with the fund, but I'm looking forward to this discussion, also looking at more from the perspective of business development for the organization.
Edwin?
Hello, everybody. My name is Edwin Wenning. I'm country director for Tajikistan since over almost 3 years. Apart from having participated in a Helvetas training on climate change and the Green Climate Fund, I have no practical experience with this topic. I have experience with, let's say, DRR from other parts of the world and also from my time from Afghanistan. Thank you. Working from the Netherlands for the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Edwin. Lionel?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Lionel, the regional coordinator for Nepal and Bhutan in Helvetas, based in Bern. I don't know much about Green Climate Fund. I remember a workshop with Maya where we tried to convince our country directors to get involved into some more activities, but that's about it.
Okay, then we go to Anja.
Good afternoon or evening. Anja de Beer, Country Director Helvetas in Kyrgyzstan. Not much experience with the Climate Fund, but at the moment we are looking into the possibilities to engage with the focal point here for the Green Climate Fund to see if there are possibilities. But with COVID and upcoming parliamentarian elections, it's difficult to get a hold of people.
And Adriana?
Hi everybody, I'm Adriana. I work at Helvetas as acquisition manager. I have no real experience with the Green Climate Fund and supported a little bit Maya with the process last year. But that's basically my experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly. I'm sitting in for Sarah Sabri from Save the Children, Switzerland. Also working in the urban programming in DRR. And in terms of experience for Save the Children, insofar in that Save the Children Australia was accredited last year in November 2019.
Thank you. Then Alexa?
Hello everyone, I'm Alexa Mekonnen and I have recently rejoined Helvetas in a new role as acquisition manager. I don't have experience with the Green Climate Fund per se, but I remember discussing it with Maya last year when you came on a mission in Bangladesh, and I have previous also working experience with WWF, which was an accredited agency.
Thank you. Then Patricia?
I am Patricia Gomez. I'm a shelter advisor and DRR focal point in MEDER. I'm based in Switzerland, but I provide technical support in the Middle East, Madagascar, and South Sudan. And I don't have experience in this Green Climate Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Dominica?
Hi, everyone. I work with Patricia in MEDER. I work as an innovation coordinator and I have no previous experience in the Green Climate Fund.
Thank you. So Baltasar?
Hello to everybody. I am Baltasar from Helvetas. My function is head of acquisitions. I have been a little bit involved in this process of accreditation of Helvetas, which is not accomplished. I mean, we didn't get accredited, but we hope we will. And I've been at the training once also on the Green Climate Fund.
Okay, thank you. So we have Eva.
Hello, my name is Eva Pineda and I work for a Danish organization. I got the invitation to your seminar from our ACT sister agency HICS, and we have been working to submit our accreditation application this past year, and are working to finalize it this year and try to submit.
So you work, Eva, for DCA or for whom?
For DCA, yes.
Okay, thank you. Then Olivier? Or Oliver? Sorry.
Yes, hello everyone. It's Oliver, and I'm participating on behalf of Caritas Switzerland, where I work as acquisition manager. And we have not really experience with the GCF. We tried to access funding once via the Asian Development Bank as accredited partner, but that ended up somehow in a kind of chaos within the ADB. So in the end, we still don't have really experience.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. I think Nicole from Helvetas is also trying to join us, but now I don't see her anymore. So I would hand over to Maya for the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Happy to start this exchange on the GCF with the update on the accreditation process. It's also nice to see that there are a lot of people from my organization, so it's really important also to inform internally on the process. So I will now share my screen, hoping that everything works. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah. First of all, just to clarify that Helvetas has opted for 2 different entry points, not only in the role of an accredited entity, but also as an executing entity. And for those that maybe are not familiar yet with these terms, an accredited entity is accredited by the board, so in accordance with the governing instrument. And these are either direct access entities, these are subnational, national or regional organizations, or also international access entities. So they manage the GCF funds, they do the overall project coordination, reporting, and also implementation. We there decided to go for a stepwise procedure, which means that we would regularly check if it's still worthwhile to continue the process. And we also decided to do this whole endeavor only if it brings added value also for other donors. So this is a very, very important criteria because it's a lot of work. But the other role is also as executing entity. These executing entities in the terminology of the GCF are responsible for project implementation on behalf of an accredited entity. It's not a must. The accredited entity can also implement projects themselves. The role of an executing entity is defined in the funding proposal, and they're accountable to the accredited entity. So we have developed some concept notes in Bolivia, for example, and now one in Myanmar. So far, not really successfully, but well, it's an ongoing process. At least in Myanmar, it will soon be shared and discussed with the NDA. But about the proposal development, also Nikolai from SOE is going to present more experiences in detail, and I will really focus on the accreditation process. So, yeah, I often am asked, well, how long does it take, the whole accreditation process? And actually for an NGO, I think the question is rather, how long does it take until you are able to submit the complete dossier? So to start the whole process. Because it's really a lot of work before you actually submit your dossier. We got the go from the management board in September 2017, we then also hired a consultant, which was Jürg Klarer, to support the whole process, and this was extremely important. We would have been completely lost without his support. And we also created a working group internally of people that are dedicated to that process, which is also was very vital. Then throughout 2018, we prepared basically the whole documentation that started with the online accreditation system. There it's sort of a pre-application process where you submit an application to get access to that online system. Then we did a gap assessment, which was basically to check all our internal documents and compare them with the requirements from the GCF. And based on that gap assessment, we developed new strategies, aligned some policies, we revised policies. So I'm going to tell more about what exactly we had to revise in that process. And at the end, with all the revised documents that we had, we got then the approval of the board of directors on the whole work that we did. And well, then we submitted it in September 2019. We then had to pay the fees. There was a pre-check and a resubmission on some details. And now, 3 years almost after the go from the management board, we have managed to start with the stage 1, which is a completeness check. So that basically started last week. And just to show you really that a lot of work has to be done before even starting stage 1. So yeah, how long does it take after stage 1? It really depends. You can also check on the GCF documents. They have all their documents are available online, so it's really a good source of information. There you can see that the whole accreditation process takes from 1 to 5 years for international access entities. At the moment, they have a pipeline of 118 applications and much more direct access entities, which are still prioritized. And when you look at the international access entities, you see this FT. This means that they are fast-tracked, that they are already accredited with, for example, the GCF. Nonetheless, as you can see, that even those that already are fast-tracked, in some cases it also takes up to 40 or 50 months, the whole process. So yeah, as you can see, it's really a lot of work and a lot of time. Here to show you the results of the gap assessment that we did. Not to go into further detail, but the criteria are divided into 7 different sections. 1, 2, 3 are like normal background documents. You have to show what added value you bring to GCF, for example. And these sections 1, 2, 3 are not really a lot of work. This is rapidly done. But section 4 to 7 are really a lot of work. And we did that gap assessment together with Jörg and saw that there are like some aspects that we fulfill quite well. Others where we are like partly fulfilling it, and quite some areas where we still did not have anything to show. So that there we really had to develop everything from scratch. So this also explains why it took so long to submit our dossier. So the main construction sites that we had was, for example, the finance manual, the whole procurement policies that were a bit outdated, they were not really state of the art. And internally, I think it was very clear already that we had to revise it anyway. But I think it wasn't done. It was really like only in the framework of the GCF accreditation that it really began to roll. Then also the code of conduct was incomplete, and we were very lucky that the code of conduct was being revised anyway. So we really could very well use these synergies and still come up with additional criteria that came from the GCF accreditation. We had, for example, unclear regulations in case of conflict of interest, like what happens if someone has conflicting interest, what is the process behind it. We had to develop a lot of regulations, processes, and describe them, who is in charge of what when this or that happens. Then also our anti-corruption guidelines, they were outdated, and we completely developed them like new. And also a missing document was the anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing policy. This is something that usually an NGO doesn't have. And that's why we had to also develop that from scratch. We took some examples that already were existing, but to integrate that in our process was also quite an issue. And another policy that we had to develop from scratch was the grant award and funding allocation mechanism. There we also developed a new policy. And another new policy was the environmental and social safeguard management system, which we also had to develop from scratch. And so, yeah, as you can see, it's really a lot of work behind. But we came to the conclusion that really these revisions that we did in 2018 really improved our overall compliance for all donors. For example, the environmental and social safeguard management system at that stage was something new, but in the meantime we could use that document for several applications. So it really helped us also to be compliant with other donors. And also what was an advantage was that it really significantly accelerated those pending revisions that were planned anyway, that had to be done at some stage. But I think through the GCF accreditation we could sort of push a bit and say, like, we have to do it now, and let's do it now. So that sort of helped a bit. I would like to close with this lessons learned. So of course it requires significant time and dedication, and it's not a one-person job. It's really a team that has to dedicate time to it. And of course, also the support of Jürg was essential. Important is really to do that gap analysis at the beginning to understand what type of how much effort it's going to take. And it should also be really clear that it's a major management decision. It's really the management board had to be regularly updated. The board of directors had to be involved throughout the process to really get their green light at the end. So we couldn't just present the documents at the end of the process, but we also had to include them throughout. So it's really, it includes the whole management. Then also, as I already said, it's really that the revision made us fitter for other donors. And also I think it's more and more the tendency that this type of requirements are going to become a reference in the near future. What is a real challenge is that as an NGO, sort of very often do not know what they refer to. It's not easily translated to NGOs. It comes originally from banks. It's like the banking structure and logic behind it. And it's not very easy to really comply with all these requirements being an NGO. And well, as I said, and direct access entities are still prioritized, which means that we do not have preference. So yeah, it's taking longer than for direct access entities to become accredited. But still, I think the whole endeavor, I mean, we're still not certain if that is going to play out for sure. But seeing that for example, GIZ, Conservation International, or also Enable, which implements the Belgium International Development Policy, are accredited. These are some sort of similar organizations to Helvetas, and I think this provides a good argumentation basis to say, yeah, why not we? I mean, there is no reason why as an NGO we could not apply to the GCF. So this is why also we said, okay, we are going to use that window of opportunity, because it could be that in the future they're going to exclude NGOs from the whole process, which they so far did not do. So with that, I would like to open the floor for your questions you might have.
I think we can, you can pose your questions directly, unmute your mic and pose your questions directly to Maya if you have any questions on her presentation specifically. We're going to have a discussion on accessing the Green Climate Fund afterwards. Any questions?
Yes. Do you have also had to make judgments in your projects on the field in some countries?
Existing projects, no, we didn't yet. I mean, it could be. I mean, when you're implementing a GCF project, there will be significant changes involved, but not the projects that are financed by other donors.
Any other questions? Okay, so thank you very much, Maya. We have the chance to discuss further later, but I would then hand off over to Nikolai. But Maya, could you stop sharing your screen so that Nikolai can share his? Thank you.
Thank you
So
very
over
much.
to you, Nikolai.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to...
We see it.
You see it?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Somehow I lost I lost the picture of the group, but that's okay if you can see it and you can hear it. Okay, so Zoe Environment Network, we're a relatively small non-profit organization based in Geneva. We work globally, but with a particular focus on the east of Europe, from Eastern Europe, the Balkans, to Central Asia. And we're generalists, so we work on a number of environmental issues, including climate change. So in this particular case, I was asked to share our specific experience with the GCF, the Green Climate Funds. And because we also do many other things, you can see it more as a witness testimony. So that's basically a hands-on experience and our impressions from that experience in one particular country in this case, which is Uzbekistan in Central Asia. I'm very happy, by the way, to see as many colleagues, especially from Helvetas, working in the same region. I'll be talking about two proposals, two projects for which we develop proposals for the Green Climate Funds. One is dedicated to agrometeorology, supporting the horticulture, the production of fruits and vegetables in Uzbekistan, in view of the changing climate with improved agrometeorological services. And another proposal, also in Uzbekistan, is about early warning. That's closer to the heart and the topic of the group, multi-hazard climate-related warning system in Uzbekistan, which is a really sort of a multi-risk based setup to improve the warning of the capacity to anticipate the hazards, but also to deal with them by warning the population, the affected communities, what to do in case they're coming. So these two things. The similarities between both proposals were that they all started as SAP, that's again GCF terminology, which stands for Simplified Approval Process. It's a fast track. It's a track which was introduced relatively recently by the Green Climate Fund for small, so-called small, below $10 million of GCF money operations. And the idea was that the decisions could be taken faster than usual. Both projects are with state counterparts in Uzbekistan, state agencies. Uzbekistan is a very regulated country, so it's actually better to work with the state agencies there at the moment. They both proposal came out of a readiness program of UNDP, which it's a global set of programs to help countries prepare for developing and submitting GCF proposals. In this case, I think it was funded by Germany, by GIZ. And then both proposals are in the area of adaptation. Green Climate Fund deals with both mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is kind of more popular by definition because it has to deal with the root causes. Adaptation is always a little bit an orphan, but at least nominally they are on equal footing. So in this case, both projects were about adaptation with a focus on observations and how you use them. So add-on services which add to the monitoring systems in place or improve monitoring systems and the capacity of the, let's say, end recipients, end users to do something about their vulnerability based on those observations. The differences were the subject matter. One project was about supporting farmers effectively. Another one was about more general DRR related response and focusing on communities in particular. The local counterparts were different. In one case, Hydrometeorology Service, in the other case, the Ministry of Emergencies. The agrometeorology project was developed by a constellation of UN agencies, UNEP, UNDP, FAO. Again, UNDP was the centerpiece of the readiness program, so it was interested in attracting other UN agencies. In this case, several of them were brought together. UNEP was the main player. FAO kind of came in at the last moments and didn't really have a chance to play a major role. But because it was a project related to agriculture, FAO was seen as an important stakeholder. The development team in this case was relatively compact, really small. It consists of UNEP. UNEP actually provided substantive expertise, which is not always the case for UN agencies. Sometimes they just act as facilitators. In this case, for substantive, Zoe was part of it, and then it was Hydromets with the local counterpart. An interesting thing about this proposal is that it started as SUP, this fast track thing, but then it strayed away from it to a full-scale proposal, even though the actual amount of money didn't really increase that much. It didn't go far above 10 million, but it was a tactical decision because in the middle of the development, somebody, I think in UNEP, found out that GCF had more money in non-sub track than in the sub track. So the decision was to change tracks, which happened. Now, all this unfortunately didn't help in the end because the proposal hit the wall due to complicated loops within GCF. I will talk about it later, but the fact here is that we received fairly conflicting feedback at different stages of the revision of the project by the GCF, and then UNEP wasn't exactly sure what to do with it. The Uzbekistan and the international implementing organization, accredited entity in that case was UNEP, tried to talk to GCF. It wasn't very successful. So in a way it ended up at a certain degree of confusion and the project stalled. The early warning program project was developed by UNDP alone. UNDP took full responsibility. It has country offices, it has a regional hub in Istanbul, which deals with the sort of more strategic issues. So the UNDP team, supported by a fairly large and changing, not very stable group of external experts, included Zoe. The proposal made it through several loops of GCF review. It still is there. The latest revision was submitted, I think, more or less exactly a month ago, still waiting for the feedback. So they're just to understand where we are in terms of the procedure there, to give you the context for the lessons learned. Now the lessons. A few words about what Zoe actually did. Well, Jörg would know very well all of that, and I think Maya was also talking about it. So we're basically developing concept notes and the project proposals for both projects, including annexes, and that's important because work on annexes can be more demanding, more challenging, more consuming, resource consuming, time consuming than work on the actual proposals. And it also involves coordination of inputs. There is no way that one person, one group can develop the whole package. It always involves various inputs from the countries, from the organizations. So coordination takes a lot of effort here as well. We were part of field missions, meeting with stakeholders and developing feasibility study only for agrometeorology. We didn't take part in the field work for the early warning project. And then we were part of addressing GCF feedback in both cases. Response tables, responses to GCF commands, clarifications, updating proposals, updating annexes, etc. So basically the full development cycle of proposal. In the case of early warning, we were not there from the beginning. We were brought in pretty much in the second half, or maybe even last third of the process. Lessons learned. So our overall impressions of the GCF pipelines. When we started this project, we knew relatively little about GCF. We were pretty much where many of the participants of this session are today. So we knew it existed, we knew what it was, we knew about the Paris Agreement, we knew climate a lot, of climate issues fairly well, and the countries, but we didn't really have experience working with GCF. So the overall impression is it is a very interesting instrument. It has money. It gives a potential to develop, to imagine, conceptualize things which can be fairly innovative and which can help countries a lot. It actually does give a lot of opportunities to get things moving in the countries in terms of dealing with climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. Boring. Well, I mean, it sounds maybe naive, but like I say, we do work with different processes, with different donors, and with different project development pipelines. GCF struck me as a particularly boring one. It's very strongly regulated. It's very bureaucratized. You feel like you're in a straitjacket. And okay, some organizations feel comfortable in that situation. We are not. That was one very clear, one clear impression that I got of the whole thing. GCF, after all, even though it talks a lot about changes and about paradigm shifts, etc., it actually doesn't seem to have very much appetite for the unorthodox. It still seems to prefer the beaten tracks. Ultra complicated formats of any documentation which is developed. There are templates, there are guidelines, there are requirements, there are many. They're very complex, they're absolutely not user-friendly. They're very difficult to read, they're very difficult to use, they're very difficult to deal with. And on top of everything, the GCF website is about the worst website I've ever seen in my life. It's absolutely unusable. But, as an example, in order to find anything at all on the GCF website, you have to use Google. There's no way you can do it through the internal navigation. There are many things which are carved in stone. There are result areas which cannot be changed. There are indicators which are imposed. There is terminology which is fairly inflexible. Okay, it's of course a feature of every donor-driven process. You have this with every donor, but GCF again struck me as particularly rigid in this respect. When it comes to the fast track, I said already that this SAP procedure was designed in order to make things easy. However, at least our impression is that it may exist for the least developed countries, but for the countries, that we're dealing with, it may be not so easy, and track differences may actually be blurred. It's not notably faster, it's not notably simpler to deal with the procedures along the fast track. And there is a feeling that maybe altogether GCF has a preference for larger projects, so it actually is not really welcoming small projects. It's not based on the statistical analysis of GCF. I think there are many other people who can do that, but it is based on the impression that it doesn't make things easier. And then one should not, like I said it already, one should not underappreciate the workloads, not only on the proposal themselves, but on all the supporting documentation. There are plenty of annexes. Again, they're rigid, they're complicated, they're not straightforward. There are safeguards, social, environmental safeguards, which seem easy at first sight, but there are many hidden issues there, many hidden requirements, many things have to happen in the countries on the side of formulating things, cross-referencing things, cross-checking things. It is actually relatively complicated and it's very, very time and resource consuming. Feasibility studies the same. The feasibility studies, well, depending on how GCF takes it, the requirements can be relatively challenging. Feedback is a particular thing. GCF, in our experience, are the masters of complications in terms of giving feedback, receiving responses to feedback, and addressing it again. First of all, feedback can easily be different among different reviewers, and you never know who you fall upon. You may fall upon one person one time, in another loop you hit a different person. The feedback can be totally different. It's not harmonized. And can be highly inconsistent between the iterations. With the agri-meteorology proposal, that's exactly what we had. When we said the concept note for review, the response was, it's great, fantastic approach, absolutely clear, please go ahead, develop full proposal. When we came back with the full proposal, the feedback was, well, we're actually not sure about the concept at all, about the approach at all. So maybe you need to consider doing something else, which was not what the whole project was about. So these things did happen and they don't really help. That's the reason that project was stalled, because basically on the conceptual level, GCF kind of blocked the developer, but by not giving clear guidance of where they wanted to be developed on the strategic level. They ask for things which are not in the lists. They ask for size of documents which are not according to their own regulations. They ask for annexes which are not on the list either. So this happened to us in reality. Feedback can also be too consistent. So the GCF can be stubborn. And we had cases where in several iterations, we got the same question over and over again, to which we tried to respond, we tried to explain why what GCF wants is not feasible in the particular context, and still we got this comment back without any reflection on our clarifications, saying basically just do it. I don't care, we know better. Ambitions. We have a feeling that the GCF kind of does not differentiate enough. It comes to every country with a kind of a similar ambition of achieving major things without trying to understand that things work differently in different contexts. And they don't believe that organizations who work in the particular countries may know better. So this is also a reality we struggled with. At the same time, well, you see a quote from an ex-executive director within Financial Times, and that's a real issue. The GCF is calling for paradigm-shifting, game-changing types of projects. It does say it wants this kind of project. But first of all, sometimes when they get projects which would be paradigm shifting, they don't see them as such. And secondly, they have their own ideas of what paradigm shifts are. And that does not necessarily match the context of the countries. And it has to do with what Maya was already talking about. So GCF effectively are investment bankers by design. So many, at least that's the impression we get, that many requirements and many expectations they approach the countries and the organizations with are based on the ideas of investment banking, which is good and bad. Okay, it's robust financially, but for example, financial expectations for co-funding, for financial sustainability, especially on adaptation projects, are very often downright unrealistic. And then feedback loops can take months. So they can take very, very long time. A few words about money. It is expensive. Gates had estimated that a smaller or middle scale proposal can easily take 6 months, require 2.5 person years, $150,000. And then longer, bigger project may take longer time. In our experience, these two projects took from 15 to 30 months, from 1 to 3 person years, including everybody involved. And one of the projects, like I said, is not completed. Another project is still in progress. So the second project is pretty much close to the Gates benchmark in terms of what it takes. What are the solutions that we see, at least for those organizations who would like to pursue this route? The organization who wants to be an accredited entity and who wants to implement a project needs a strong expertise, experience within the organization with the GCF type projects. Can be GCF, can be GF, for example, Global Environment Facility, similar, but it needs expertise. Without this kind of experience, I don't think the chance is really very big. And the organization needs a well-oiled project development machine, which Helvetas, for example, obviously has. It needs capacities to deal with large-scale projects, complicated, interlinked, and deal with all the complexities of those. Ideally, it also needs backdoor access to GCF. It helps a lot if you can talk to people down there, up there, ask them questions, get their clarifications informally, and solve things on that level in addition to formal feedbacks. There needs to be very good connection with the local counterparts in the country, the government, the designated authority, because there are a lot of loops which need to be maintained, a lot of communication, a lot of clarifications to come from them, absolutely necessary. And then the solid climate and development background expertise in the team. GCF is pretty strict on climate-related justification. It needs solid science, or it thinks it needs solid science. So it needs people in the team, or one needs people in the team who can talk that language. Talk the language of WMO, for example. Now, from looking around, not our experience, but looking around what others are doing, we increasingly see that organizations are staying away from GCF funding. The World Bank is one example. ADB was mentioned today. Is becoming difficult. In our region, UNDP is absolutely dominant in adaptation case. For instance, it implements all the national adaptation planning projects in all the countries in our region, meaning Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia. Meanwhile, the quality of financed operations is not always high. GCF can be fairly opportunistic. It definitely applies, for example, for these NAP projects, National Adaptation Plans. Very many of them are not of high quality. They just happen because they have to happen. And we have also seen other projects which are not national adaptation plans, which are also not of very high quality, which seem to have been financed rather based on opportunism than on real quality assessment, quality management. And there are reputational issues with the GCF. There have been some critical external evaluations. The price is not always good. Related both to decision-making, to the climate and the secretariat, just something to keep in mind. It happens to every UN organization. GCF is no exception to that. Finally, and I'm happy that Stefan is here today. Switzerland is a strong player in GCF. It's a founder, it's a consistency member. So Switzerland has means to influence some of those things and impose changes. We very much hope this may happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. Are there any direct questions to the presentation of Nikolai?
Maybe I can say something if nobody else wants to ask a question. Nikolai, do you think it's actually worthwhile going there for GCF funding? At the end, it didn't sound a very rosy picture.
It depends on who you are and also what you can afford. If you are internationally registered, I mean, if you are an accredited entity and you're a relatively large organization with these capacities, with right expertise, with a well-oiled machine for developing proposals, and you can afford taking risks, it's probably worthwhile trying. Having said that, I mean, if the World Bank is having problems with GCF, basically saying maybe it's not worth it, it's at least food for thought. I think if you talk to many people who have experience with GCF, many of them are, let's say, bipolar, ambiguous. There is no single answer. I would say it's still worth trying if you believe that the benefits outweigh risks, but you should realize that the risks are very strong. It's the same as with accreditation, I think, with Maya said it very well. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time in astronomical calendar terms. It takes a lot of person years. If you have this time, you have this person years, the benefits may be there. If you don't, maybe just prohibitive.
Nikolai, how long did you work on the elaboration of the project? And where does the project actually stand now?
Yes, there was a slide. I want to go to presentation now. Back to presentation. There are two projects. They took between 15 to 30 months by now. So the one which took 15 months, the agrometeorology, it is nowhere. It was stalled because of the inability to find the common ground between the GCF Secretariat and the accredited entity. The project for early warning has been submitted, resubmitted again last month, and UNDP is now waiting for the feedback.
So, Nikolai, I have a question about the role as an executing entity. I suppose, I mean, you are co-developing the development also in the view of being an executing entity at the end. So how did you ensure that you actually will be employed as an executing entity?
Very good question. We did not. There are different modes. In many cases, executing entities are actually local, let's say national organizations. They can be governmental, can be non-governmental, can be business, but they tend to be local. In our case, in both situations, both projects, we were basically participating as consultants developing projects. There was no agreement that we become executing entities, which of course is very difficult in a way. It's much easier to develop projects where you know you'll be part of the implementation, simply just on the level of motivation. It's much easier to be motivated in all senses if you know that. In the agrometeorology projects, we had sort of a potential to become an executing entity if the project were to go ahead, but it was never carved in stone. In the early warning program with UNDP, I actually doubt that we would be, but so we were employed simply to basically use our brains, which we did.
Okay, so you were basically like paid for your efforts to develop the proposal. Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions to the presentation of Nikolai? We can't hear you, Nicole.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I would be very interested in knowing a bit how have you managed actually to become involved and elaborating the proposal. Was that coincidence, or as you were working in the region, or how was this established?
Yes, well, we have been very long present in Central Asia, for example. So we know organizations know us, and climate change is one of the areas where we have been active. So we basically know the players. In this particular case, I think the first project that we got into was the agrometeorology. And that was through UNEP, because UNEP took elites, like I said, and we work very much with UNEP on various things. So when they needed expertise, they basically looked at us for the regional expertise, not substantive there. And then because we worked on that proposal with UNEP and thereby by extension with UNDP Uzbekistan, when UNDP Uzbekistan needed help with the second proposal, they also came to us. So it's actually pretty simple.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to Nikolai? Otherwise, if there are none, I suggest that we take a short break, if that's okay with everybody. But before we do that, I would like to welcome Mr. Schwager from the Federal Office of the Environment. Maybe you can briefly turn on your video so that we can see you.
Hi there. Hello, everybody.
Hello, good afternoon,
Thank you for inviting me. I only managed to be on it since 2 o'clock, but I've listened in and I will continue to listening in until it's my 5 minutes. And I shut the video off because very often in the past I noticed that the more people have the video on, the slower the connection is. So I will be back.
That's good. Thank you very much. So let us take a quick break of 10 minutes and then be back here at 2:20 Swiss time.
Very good.
Okay. All right, it's 20 past. I hope most of you are back. Can you give a hands up if you're back? Great. Okay, so most people seem to be back. So we would enter now into a more open discussion round. I said at the beginning we have Jörg Klorer with us. He's a consultant with extremely vast knowledge about the Green Climate Fund. So we're very happy to have you with us, Jörg, to answer all our questions. And just as an icebreaker, I would start with the first one. After Nikolai's presentation, we might all not be so confident anymore if this engagement with the Green Climate Fund is a good idea. So my question to you, Jörg, is it worth for NGOs to try to engage with the Green Climate Fund? And what, in your view, is the most promising way to do so? You're mute, Jörg. You have to unmute your mic.
So here we go. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Many thanks for having me. you raise now the expectation so much with saying what kind of experts I am that it's almost impossible to comply with the expectations, I guess. So, but nevertheless, I'll do my best. Your question was whether it's worth for NGOs to get engaged. I guess ultimately each one of you has to answer that question by yourself. Depends a little bit, I guess, what you want to achieve. So I think from my perspective, I would say yes, of course, right? If you have good ideas and if you really have, you know, what the GCF calls paradigm shift kind of approaches to help the climate problem, then I think you will find open door at the GCF and possibilities there. Certainly with every organization that provides money and in a big style on top of it, you know, there will be complications. It's not going to be easy. So you'll need to have a long breath and so on. And you'll have to have some, you know, possibility to bite through, to go through the process, to invest also in advance. But on the other hand, I think the possibilities to get large projects funded and to have really big impacts is also there. So it depends a little bit, you know, what you want to achieve, I guess, where you want to achieve it, how you want to achieve it. But if this is the case that you really have you know, a mission to contribute to adaptation or mitigation, I think the GCF can be an excellent avenue. I think it was also a pleasure to be on board with Helvetas in the Accreditation of Helvetas, and my fingers continue to be crossed very much. I hope very soon we'll get a news from Helvetas or the board, or maybe Stefan sends around an email, or we just see it elsewhere that Helvetas was accredited or is getting accredited. So I hope this news will come soon. And I guess, you know, then it is about preparing proposals eventually. And yeah, well, then, you know, we'll see. But I think, you know, it's a very good track now, and fingers crossed for that. So yeah, this is, you know, the kind of elusive answer that I will give to your question. I hope it is okay.
Yes, of course. And I open the floor to everyone for questions to Jörg, but also to the others in the round. Or also, if you want to share any of your experiences that you had, if any, then please go ahead.
Yes, I would have a question to Jörg. Nikolai said that there were a lot of conflicting feedbacks coming from the GCF about the proposal. What are your experiences there, and how did you deal in the past with conflicting feedbacks?
Okay, many thanks. You know, now that Stefan is on the call, I must be a little bit careful in what I'm saying. But actually on this one, to be frank, I would agree a little bit what Nikolai said. You know, as mentioned before, I was actually involved in quite a number of concept note developments and funding proposal development. And accordingly, I've seen also quite a number of feedbacks from secretariat staff. And yeah, so I would actually agree with what Nicola said in this area, that it is true that sometimes you get conflicting feedbacks from staff. And it is true that you can wait a long time until you get feedback. I think this has gotten better now. Was an issue maybe a year or two ago, and had to do with the staffing of the secretariat as well. And it's getting better. But yes, sometimes it's a bit disheartening, yeah, to get so many feedbacks and sometimes conflicting ones. And yes, sometimes you also had the feeling that it wasn't very competent, frankly. So yes, it has been an issue. And I think one of the ways the GCF Secretariat is trying to address this is by hiring more consultants. maybe some of you are looking at the procurement websites of the GCF or at the consultant hiring website. There are 2 web pages there. And just now, I think still there is an opening for external advisors to help give feedbacks on draft funding proposals, which are close to board submission. Earlier, there was one about PPF, project preparation facility expertise that was being sought, and also on concept notes in the various thematic areas consultants are being hired. And even now in the most recent board background documentation that is online also, you can look at that, B26, I think Stefan took place. You can see as an annex to each funding proposal that was tabled, a long list of comments from various institutions, including the ITAP. So yes, there is many comments coming in. If you're in the proposal development field active, you will get a lot of feedback. And yes, it can be an issue. But I believe that ultimately, if you have good arguments, if you have a good concept, if you have a good institutional setup and so on, and you have a little bit of stamina, you can get through this. I think also with a little bit of experience and looking how other proposals in a similar area than the one you are preparing have been arguing or have elaborated their documents or so on, you can learn a lot from these precedence cases, and then also refer to those if you happen to get feedback from staff, secretariat staff that seems to be not relevant or contradicting or whatever. So this is a very good way also. Yeah, so that's what I would say on this question. And it's maybe to add, it's an ongoing learning process as well. I've been developing a concept note development workshop format for the government of Japan, and we have implemented that, maybe 6-7 times in the last 2-3 years. And that's the majority of concept notes I prepare came through that format. And yeah, so even during these 2-3 years, the requirements changed a little bit. Some issues got clarified through board decisions or other guidance issued by the Secretariat, and so on and so forth. So it's a continuous and constant learning process for project developers, and it's really worth to look at newly adopted board proposals, newly board adopted funding proposals, how they argue, how, also this over time evolves their content and how argumentation is getting sharpened and whatnot, because that really represents also the benchmark where you can then, compare your own ideas and proposals to. Yeah, so these are maybe a few thoughts that come to my mind on this question.
Jane has raised her hand.
Yes, hello. Just a question on some of the recent negative publicity around GCF. Just yesterday, there was an article in the Financial Times claiming that a lot of people in the Secretariat are making complaints about sexual harassment, etc. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of sort of negative dynamics within GCF, or do you think this is also sort of somehow politically motivated to put a smear on the organization?
I'm not at all linked to the Secretariat, so I'm no way an employee or otherwise a representative of the Secretariat, so it would be probably inappropriate if I would have an opinion on this particular issue. If I'm very frank with you, I actually haven't been in Songdo at all, although I dedicated most of my work time in the past 3, 4, 5 years to the Green Climate Fund. So I don't really know, how everyday work happens there. Of course, I've been in contact with many people and so on, but my work was more in the field, in the countries itself, in the 30+ countries I worked with in the GCF context. So I can't really answer this question. Maybe Stefan knows more about this. Yeah, it came as a surprise to me as well. It's not a good thing, I think. I think it's something that is my personal opinion that should be addressed very rigorously. No idea what is the background to this. But definitely it's no good to have this kind of news. in my personal dealings, directly and indirectly with Secretariat people, I got known to them as very decent and nice people. I never observed any, especially not sexual harassment coming from them or so, nothing like this ever. So quite on contrary, it was struck, you know, how I was usually struck how nice people these are, right? And usually also quite knowledgeable people. So yeah, to me this is a surprise and no idea what is the background to this. But if you don't mind, I would rather pass on to Stefan. Maybe he knows more about this.
Question 2.
Maybe first, there are 2 Stefans in the call. So the question was to Mr. Schwager. I think
yes.
If you would like to react to the question of Jane Carter.
Thank you. I have to unmute myself. Well, thank you. And again, thank you for asking me to take part in this exercise this afternoon. And sorry for my late response. What kept me busy was exactly these kind of things, like the article in the Financial Times, which is just the tip of the iceberg, the visible one to the public. Well, mine is my take, and I have a little bit more than just a bit of an insight. It's a long story, and I don't have a whole afternoon to tell you about that. Wherever there's a smoke, there's also some kind of fire. But I believe in this case, we have much more smoke than fire. Maybe just to put things in context, there have been from mid-18 until the end of 19, so a little bit more than a year and a half, there have been 19 cases that were investigated by the Independent Integrity Unit, and 17 led to nothing. So, I mean, cases were closed, and 2 led to some findings, but no massive or major sanctions that were needed. This is on top of many allegations that were made, and the IIU, the Independent Integrity Unit, usually does a pre-investigation before they really do a full-fledged one, seeing how solid the case and the arguments are that are put forward. And there I don't have the precise statistic, but there were several of these allegations that were ended after a pre-investigation. So one should not blow it out of proportion. But maybe just a last word about it. The atmosphere in Songdo, would I recommend good friends to apply for a job there? Well, it depends. It depends if you like kimchi, but more than that, it's a very unique place. And I join Jörg Klarer. Good to see you again, by the way.
Yeah.
That most of the people that work at the Secretariat are very competent, very dedicated. Many of them put in long hours. But of course, they come from different backgrounds. And if you are in a place like Songdo, for those of you that have ever been there, it's a new town, it's a new development. It's not international at all, even though Korea tries to make it the international district of Incheon Songdo. It basically is Korean. And so if you're there, you hang out with the same few people that are your work buddies, and not everybody shares the same values when it comes to, I don't know, moral and social attitudes. And that leads to difficult situation. Last word, the GCF Secretariat, the new ED, has actually taken some action since he's been taken on board. There's been an ethics officer that was hired to handle, let's say, minor cases, or before they go into the machine of the Independent Integrity Unit. HR has been beefed up to handle cases where staff have an issue. And of course, there's a very rigid policy when it comes to sexual harassment, abuse, but it's actually more meant to be applied to projects and funding proposals. And since there are not that many actual projects implementation underway, the integrity unit is dealing with these kind of whistleblowing cases. So I wouldn't put it out of proportion. This will also pass. Over.
Thank you very much. So, Stefan Lloyd, you said you had a question?
Yes, a short question concerning the project development, how it is influenced. It is also a topic, the inclusion of persons with disabilities or other marginalized populations or people, that they are they should be or will be included in the executive projects on the field.
Suppose this question is addressed to me.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the question. From my perspective, I would say that, you need to keep in mind that the Green Climate Fund is a fund that focuses on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So the key emphasis of any proposal that will be funded by this institution will be adaptation or mitigation, and not so much issues like you just mentioned. However, it is necessary that each and every proposal that is approved eventually by the board and then funded by the fund and eventually implemented by the accredited entity should also comply with environmental and social safeguards. And in there, there is like, on the one side, risk needs to be identified and managed. So if a proposal has negative impacts on the social dimension, for example, then these risks should be identified and eventually mitigation strategies should be formulated and implemented. But also on the positive side, you can point out in a proposal that, a proposal does have positive effects in the social dimension, just like in the areas you mentioned, right? And this might, contribute to a positive uptake of a proposal, and the scoring maybe as well. Well, there's no formal scoring really, this is about, it will be considered eventually as a plus point, so to say, of a proposal if you can add that, but it will not be at the core of a proposal itself. One area maybe that you could highlight, and I understand we also have a few participants coming from this particular area, is health, climate change and health. So as you know, climate change is expected and in some areas already has quite significant effects on health of population, human health. And, is one of the areas where the Green Climate Fund can allocate finance to actually help with health systems to adapt to climate change challenges and so on. It's an area that has received very little funding so far. And I find that very, I wouldn't say disappointing, but really hope that in the future there will be a number of health projects coming through the board, being approved through the board. I don't know exactly what the pipeline is, but we don't have an accredited entity yet in this area, I think, right? The World Health Organization, for example, would be such an entity, I guess, that could propose many projects, or maybe also some of the NGOs represented here in the room. In the virtual room. So I think this is an area where you could then bring also issues in, proposals that have address problems that are rooted by climate change challenges and affect, for example, people, social groups, for example, that you mentioned, or people with particular health conditions and so on, right? This can also be linked with disaster relief. I understood we have some DR people here in the room. So for example, in Mongolia, I did some work in this area where usually disaster relief and health issues are very much coupled. And given the remoteness of how some people there work and live, and you know, the relatively badly developed health system as a whole, it makes a lot of sense to combine these kind of two issues in the context of climate change. And NGOs may be a very good, you know, specializing in these areas, disaster relief and or human health and health management may be a very good avenue as a accredited entity eventually, or maybe executing entity to address such kind of issues. I hope my elaborate answer is useful and answers really what you wanted to ask.
Yes, just to say, we as Christian Blind Mission, we have made the experience that in the recent cyclone Amphan COVID-19 thing, that people with disabilities, for example, about 20% of population, it is guessed, in Bangladesh or in poor pockets, that a lot of them didn't reach the help or couldn't profit from DRR measures from state, and so a lot of them have been really excluded. I could imagine that also people who are religious minorities could be excluded, not forcément because they are consciously excluded, but yeah, you don't realize that they are there, and you don't consciously go to reach them, and so it could be that nearly 20% of population are more or less excluded from the activities. That's because I have give you the question. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I understand, and I think particularly in this area, it will be possible to propose, for example, disaster relief projects which focus on extending governmental services to marginalized groups. You have to keep in mind that the fund itself, the GCF, is impartial, but if the government signs up to include also marginalized groups, for example, in their own services to address, then certainly, right? I have a little bit experience with a similar proposal in the Philippines, which I think recently got approved by the board, which is about upgrading the disaster management system there in the Philippines, and that also focuses on extending services, early warning services, for example, to many people. And one of the key indicators for the Green Climate Fund in the adaptation area is how many people benefit from adaptation activities. So and you know how many lives are saved. There's different kind of approaches there, without going into details there, but there you can really score. Then you know, if you can show that you can reach out to a lot of people, and I guess in Bangladesh this should be easily possible, then this will be certainly beneficial. But always the key argumentation has to be on the climate change side. So in this case, adaptation, climate-induced disasters, and that's really where the GCF will provide direct financing. Yeah.
Maybe I can share some experience also from our side on this. We work not with people with disabilities, but what you also mentioned, Stefan, is that there are minority communities. We work with Adibashi, so indigenous people in northwestern Bangladesh. And we have observed that they are excluded from disaster relief services and also have big difficulties accessing any financing or financial means to adapt to changes happening. So we have, at the end of last year, handed in a concept note to the GCF exactly on this, inclusion of minority communities to have better access to financial means for adaptation. And they liked the concept note very much. The negative part of it is that we actually wanted to go for an SAP, so a simplified approval process, which would take us through the process faster and would not require us to do this immense big thing of a feasibility study, which is also a totally big black box to me, what actually comes into it and what not. Because we work with indigenous people, we now have to go through full approval process and do the full feasibility study and all the annexes. So this is where we stand. I think they are interested in proposals like this, or that's the experience we had. But we are stuck in the middle of this very complicated process. And if no one else has a question, I would like to ask where we could find any more information about this black box feasibility study, what comes into it, how vast does it have to be. I have an example seen from UNDP Bangladesh for their project on access to water for women in the coastal areas. It's over 1,000 or something pages long. This is a really big black box to me, and I would be super interested to know if there's anywhere where you can find information about how to elaborate a feasibility study, what needs to be in it, and how vast does it need to be?
Here as well, it might be interesting maybe if Stefan could share his, Stefan Schwager could share his knowledge. As far as I know, it is indeed such that there is no templates, formats around at all as to the minimum contents of feasibility studies, which is, however, a compulsory annex to a funding proposal. So, yeah, I've actually pretty much read most of the GCF board decisions, which are usually very long documents and not easy to read, and I don't think I ever came around to such a template or to even to a list of items that must be covered. Also in the handbook, the GCF handbook, which is now available and quite a useful document, but very complicated, I guess, especially for newcomers to read, but nevertheless, even in there, I don't think there's any reference to that. And the other complication is that the feasibility studies, unlike gender action plans and assessments and ESS studies, ESIAs, are not routinely published by the GCF or by the accredited entity. So they basically are representing project documentation that has to be submitted and prepared, but they will not be, usually distributed officially or publicly, right? So yes, it is an issue. It is a black box. I think that is one of the areas where it would be useful to have guidance from the Secretariat. And my best advice here would be that you get in touch with the Secretariat team or person that you're in contact with on a particular proposal or concept note and ask the question directly, what exactly they want. Most certainly, I would not think that a 1,000-page feasibility study represents good international practice, definitely too long. And last point I would add here on this is that you have to keep in mind that for preparing feasibility studies and other annexes and funding proposal itself, other annexes to funding proposal and the funding proposal itself, it is possible to get project preparation facility support. You probably know that. that this is a particular pocket of money or a fund within the GCF that is dedicated to provide, you know, this kind of funding to hire experts and so on to elaborate, you know, documents just like feasibility study, environmental social impact assessment, and so on. Maybe a bit more difficult for an international agency than for a direct access entity, but in principle it's available. And there you have actually a filter because you have to give a budget, you know, for example, activity like feasibility study. And if the secretary considers that way out of proportion, they will probably tell you in the process of approving a project preparation facility, which in turn gives you then an idea also, you know, how elaborate the feasibility can be, right? If you have a 50 days for an expert, it's a different thing as compared to, you know, 200 days or 20 days or so. But yeah, that's what I know on this particular question. Maybe Stefan knows more on this one. If I can hand over the ball to you again.
No, thank you very much, but not really. Thank you.
Yeah, this is probably an area where you would have, yeah, hardcore project developers, you know.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question two questions, one from Maya, one from Nicole. Maya, please go ahead.
Thank you. I would have a question about the SAP, the simplified approval process. We were in a similar situation as Nikolai said, that we were not sure whether to try it through the SAP process. You said, Nikolai, that you did decide from a strategic point of view to go for a full proposal. And my question would be to Jörg, is that really the case? I mean, if a project in principle falls into the category of SAP, is it advised to nevertheless do a full proposal because they have more funds available?
Okay, I think for the SAP there is a particular budget available which is occasionally increased and extended by the board. I think that's the mechanism there. Stefan, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there is a shortage of funds right now. I'm not entirely sure about that. What I know is that the SAP mechanism has met quite a bit of interest. You know, I work a lot with direct access entities, and for them, SAP is usually attractive because of the hope that it will be a little bit less complicated, more easy to understand, and so on. And some of them are anyway in the micro category and can anyway just do projects up to $10 million, which for some of them still is a lot of money compared to their track records. So yeah, there is interest in that, and as you can see also board approvals, there is quite a number of SAP proposals right now approved, so that I think also speaks for it. In some cases really the accredited entities manage to go through SAP processes very quickly. For example, my good friend Benedict Libanda from the Environmental Investment Fund in Namibia, I think he managed to push through one SAP proposal from starting writing it until it was board approved in something like 4 months or so, which is not bad, right? But there's also other cases where it takes much longer. So it's a bit difficult to say, you know, that in principle this is because of the procedure. I actually rather think this is more the content, right? You should keep in mind that with SAP you have quite elaborate guidelines out there. The SAP team at the GCF Secretariat is quite a good one, I think, in my experience. I think there's an Italian manager there, very committed, probably one of those people Stefan referred to who are doing you know, long hours and so on. And yeah, I had a very good impression of those guys. And they have issued guidelines for all the result areas, you know, what constitutes SAP proposals, what doesn't, and some guidance on how to prepare. You even have tools there which you can download on the SAP webpage, which help you prepare budgets, for example, and give you some clues as to what will be accepted and what not. So this is very helpful. It all doesn't exist for the regular funding proposal path. So, you know, and SAP in principle is for up to 10 million Green Climate Fund contribution projects, so what is called micro projects in the context of the Green Climate Fund, which still is a lot of money. And for category C, environmental social safeguards, so it's, you know, where really you have very minor or even negligible environmental social impact. So there is quite a restriction there. And I guess in practice, at least that's my experience, when you have project ideas, what I recommend would be that you focus primarily on the idea itself. What exactly you want to achieve? What is the climate rationale behind it? That has to be very strong and well thought through. And you derive the log frame from that. For me, usually the first step, right, in designing is to prepare a log frame. And yeah, from there you can then very quickly also decide whether maybe this idea, this approach fits into a SAP context or not, and then you go either this or that track. Once you are following, for example, a SAP track, it is quite easy actually to switch to the regular track. The formats are not that different. Principal pieces of information remain the same in concept note template and also funding proposal template. You can use information prepared for the SAP track in the regular track. The other way around may be a bit more challenging, but it's not really a big issue. Maybe during the negotiations with the Secretariat, once you have a concept note prepared, you can, you know, sorry, what did I want to say then? If you have negotiations, maybe you can decide then that maybe, you know, you started off with the SAP and then you can decide maybe the regular is a better avenue, that's fine, right? Or maybe with the NDA. NDA, by the way, I wanted to say for long, very important to have good relations with NDA. They can be, you know, the door openers and, you know, actually make your proposal a success. If you have them not on your side, it will be an issue on the other side. So also that is very important to discuss early on with the NDAs, you know, SAP or not. And the scope, you know, paradigm shift usually requires also quite a large scope. You cannot change the world with small money usually, or maybe some ideas can, but at least, yeah. So if you want to really roll out the mainstream technology or an idea or a behavior pattern or so, then you need scope, right? And you need to reach out to many people, and then maybe, you know, you should consider that early on as well as very important investment criteria of the GCF. So these are a few ideas which come to my mind. Maya, hope I could address your question to some extent.
Yes, thank you.
So one last question from Nicole.
Thanks, Judith. Very kind. I'm not sure if it's the best question for the ending of the webinar, but we have been talking a lot about the complicated processes, which has been highlighted by every speaker so far. I would very much be interested to hearing a bit more or get some insight reflection. What is planned in the future with the Green Climate Fund? I mean, over years it has been said that the processes are about to be simplified. There are certain things which have been simplified, but still you need to be an expert. But I mean, then we want to somehow work with the most vulnerable to get a voice for the most vulnerable. So the most least developed countries are the ones which are struggling the most, except you have really excellent consultants. So, I mean, is there a view that things will change, simplified processes, or this is just remains wishful thinking?
Okay, many thanks for the question. From my side, I think Stefan will be really a very appropriate person to maybe answer this one strategically, because Stefan is sitting on the board of the Green Climate Fund and actually has a capacity to propose changes to policies or even adopt new policies, which I most definitely don't have. From my side, I would maybe add a few ideas. One of them being that we need to be realistic also. You know, we can't expect a global fund like the Green Climate Fund, who really serves about 160 countries worldwide, which are very diverse. We can't expect that to work completely simple and with templates that everybody immediately understands and so on, right? So I think it's also, on the other hand, it's a huge achievement that there is an organization that manages to actually accommodate such different cultures, ways of living, and also challenges primarily in terms of adaptation and mitigation. That is, for me, clearly just simply normal that there is some complications in procedures then, you know, because this is a fit for all approach here that we are dealing with. Also extends, by the way, to accreditation, right? Having done a couple of accreditation supports in the past, the contexts in different countries are so different, right? And but the standards are the same for everyone, and it is not so easy to come up with standards that really fit all. And it's also a second point, learning process, right? I think the GCF is really doing that very well. Overall, of course, there is also negative examples, but overall, really positive how open issues are being discussed at board level. I invite you all to, you know, watch a few board videos. It's usually quite entertaining, actually, I think, to see how, you know, deliberations are happening there, how openly people talk about issues, about things they don't like, how seriously these issues are also being taken, and how, you know, criticism is actually taken on board and very often does find its way into improved policies. So the third point, there is constantly new policies and updates of policies. This is of course confusing for, you know, people who don't deal on a regular basis with the GCF. I completely understand that. If there are, you know, every 2-3 years the policies being updated, maybe it's not happening that often, but it does happen. So it has that negative side effect, but on the positive side, the policies are getting better. Let's also keep in mind that the GCF is still a relatively young organization. What is now, not even 5 years old, maybe 6 years old, I don't know exactly actually. So, you know, given the task at hand, it's actually doing quite well. And then, you know, keep in mind the diversity in staff was mentioned earlier. Can be a problem when it comes to the black box of commenting on concept notes and funding proposals. I agree to that. On the other hand, it's just human, right? If you look at the composition of the GCF Secretariat, you will have people from all over the world. I guess it's pretty much a majority of people from developing countries. Not really liking that term too much, but anyway, you know what I mean. And, you know, which may not always have the same level of education as somebody who went through Harvard University or so. And then also, you know, people with various backgrounds. You have a lot of people from the UN system there. And, you know, some people are used to the systems they worked in their life long and maybe still have some attitudes related to that old role or so, right? And keep having that during the new role at the Green Climate Fund. And sometimes it becomes obvious as well. So it's just humans that things like this happen, right? But overall, I think you will find, once you engage really, and I think in a way it was very nice what Maya mentioned in her presentation, the engagement of Helvetas in the accreditation eventually led to a perception within the organization that the new procedures which came out of this process actually help in other areas as well. And maybe the same holds true eventually once Helvetas or other organizations get engaged in funding proposal development. Maybe the experience collected during those processes, even if it is hard and sometimes difficult, but sometimes disheartening, is maybe still you know, improving the overall project preparation capacity and helpful also for preparing proposals for other donors. Keep in mind also that the GCF is really by now, I think, quite dominant in the climate finance area in every aspect, and is setting standards in almost all the aspects, right? How a good proposal looks like. Increasingly, the benchmark are GCF proposals, for example. And yeah, of course, that also creates then feelings, right? And some people will not like it so much and so on. And it will not get less complicated for the GCF organizationally. But on the other hand, think about what would be without having this fund, especially from a country perspective. You know, many of the countries really like the GCF primarily for the direct access possibility. You know, who else is doing direct access? Adaptation Fund, yes, but it's small, it's not growing. GCF, it's a bit an outdated mechanism, isn't it? It's UN dominated anyway. And who else? EU DEFCO, special cases, you know, but okay. And that's it, right? The rest is really multilateral, international, bilateral, and countries clearly want to have direct access as well. So, you know, there are lots of benefits there. And I think new avenues unlocking which otherwise wouldn't be available. So I think this is also important to consider. Yeah.
Nikolai, you wanted to quickly react, and maybe then Stefan Schwager can also say a few words before we hand over to Stefan Schwager anyway to tell us a little bit about what is the official Swiss engagement with the Swiss Green Climate Fund.
Thank you very much. No, I agree with Jörg that we should be grateful that such a mechanism exists. But I'm not sure that we should be grateful for it at whatever cost. I think the GCF has inherited a lot of complication from the Global Environment Facility. And the Global Environment Facility is still alive, and it's also a big funding mechanism in the environmental field. And this still doesn't make it more likable. And I think we have all the right to expect that a global mechanism like GCF does not need to be as complicated as relatively non-inclusive and intransparent as it is now. So I would say that we should definitely try to work with it. We should definitely try to get the best of what it can offer. But I also would say, and Switzerland has a role and can play a role, that we should not see its current status and current routines and culture as something which is carved in stone. I don't think we should just accept that, because there are many things there which are not likable at all, which makes life complicated. And these are not only our lives, it's lives of the country that is supposed to serve. So I really hope that Switzerland, at least Switzerland, can play a certain role in changing that culture in a direction which would make the instrument more efficient and more easy to work with and better fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the perfect time to hand over to Stefan Schwager. Would you want to react to this and then tell us also a little bit about the official engagement of Switzerland with the Green Climate Fund?
All right. Well, welcome again. Yeah, interesting points, and you touched on many different issues. Is it worthwhile engaging? I think it's a question that you all have to ask yourself, not just with the GCF, but with whatever other organization that you're engaging. I agree with your Clara. We all know action is urgent, action could be better. Then there's all the specific, how would I say, pet issues of different organizations with a special regional focus or thematic focus. And that makes it difficult for the GCF to accommodate all of that. One has to admit that the GCF, while the Secretariat now has gained in strength and numbers, there's about 500 people. So they are actually well structured. The last replenishment also was fairly robust. But there's still fundamental divergence on matters like what is the GCF exactly to do? Yes, we have a governing instrument, but you can interpret the different articles of this document in very different ways. And I will come to that when I'm speaking about accreditation. And I have a presentation. I had it in German, and so as I was changing it over to English, I made a few more fixes. So I will send it to you, and you will make it available to all those who have been on the call. Anyway, so it's somebody once put it very nicely. The Green Climate Fund is like a flying the plane while you're still building it, and that's not necessarily what air traffic security organizations recommend to do, and so that's one of the reasons why we I say we because I consider myself part of the problem, but also probably hopefully more part of the solution. Why decisions take so long, why decisions are very complicated, why accreditation processes take forever, why the time between project design and then when you send it in to Songdo and actually dealing with it at the board and hopefully getting an approval is still very long. So there's a lot of room for improvement. But in order to improve, I think the minds have to be more thinking along the same lines. And I think it's very unfortunate that a document that was supposed to be out at the beginning of this year is still somewhere on the desks or on the shelf, the updated strategic plan. And one can say, if you do not have clarity about the strategy, any place you go will be either the wrong or the right one, depending on your specific view. And that means that if you don't have a strategy that is sufficiently clear also on where we are heading, every funding proposal will face fundamental discussion, which is not per se bad, but it's of course not very effective and efficient. Every accreditation proposal will also run into fundamental discussions. And for those of you who have ever watched and had the patience to stay on for more than half an hour, watched a GCF board session, sometimes it's surprising what kind of statements you hear. Totally diverging views and of course some in a I would say actually puzzling, mesmerizing way of interpreting the governing instrument. And this is after 7 years that these governing instruments are out. So the board is highly politicized, and this is where probably most of the problem comes from. Then there's all the other issues. Of course, not all countries have the same capacity. Expectations have been high when this fund was created, and so on. So if you have very high expectations and high ambition, actually, it's very difficult to live up to all that. I would leave it at these general comments, and then I'm glad to give you a quick introduction to the accreditation topic, and anxious to have questions and answers, because probably that's more interesting than me giving a long lecture. Okay?
Yeah, that's great. We should also close at past at the latest. I need to go and pick up a kid from school, and I think yeah.
Time critical.
Okay, thank you.
That's very good. That's very good. So I assume since you're all familiar with the GCF in a way or another, I don't have to bother you with all the issues about when it was started and what the objectives and such is. But just very briefly, Switzerland and the GCF, we've been involved from the onset. We were part of the transitional committee that did the design of the GCF, which resulted in the governing instrument. Switzerland also contributed from the beginning. First 100 million over 3 years, And now just recently we had the decision by the Federal Council to pay another 150 million for the period 2020 to 23. We had different constituency in the beginning with the Russian Federation and now with Finland, Hungary, Liechtenstein, and Monaco. And we coordinate all the activities between different federal offices, namely BAFU, DEZA, and SECO. Always in good Swiss harmony, and sometimes we see things a little bit different, but overall fairly effective and efficient coordination. The Swiss priorities, yeah, you can read it when I send you the slides. It's very high flying, clear profile for the GCF, needs complementarity, ensuring transparency in procedures and effective use of funds, equity consideration, gender, indigenous people, whatever all comes in there too. Efficient network of partner organizations, and also enhanced private sector engagement. When we look at the chat, no, I can't bring, maybe I bring that one at the very end. So let me zoom into the accreditation. You may know that there's currently 97 that have been accredited, 76 of which have completed their legal arrangements, and 70 have the process completed, and 118 are in the pipeline. Pipeline means not just any pipeline. Pipeline means you got a registration number by the GCF, and there's, I think, another 200 wildcards that hope to make it in. So you see that in all these years, 70 have now completed the process, amongst which some international organizations, which were not the easiest clients, because of course they say the GCF has to accommodate their specific policies and standards and safeguards. But it also means that it's a very slow process. One of the reasons, I don't want to blame colleagues from developing countries, but it is one of the reasons that they very much push for accreditation of national or regional direct access entities. So whenever there's another international organization coming on, or a bilateral one like Agence Française du Développement, or recently the Belgium Development Fund, or whatever it's called, they say, we don't really need that. We would like to see more direct access entities from developing countries. That raises then the question, yes, in principle, right, the GCF should be a different fund from others, should not be like what is already out there between MDBs, UN organizations and others. But how many accredited entities does the GCF or does a fund like the GCF need to be successful in its mission? It's a good question. Probably there's different answers to it. And one of the reasons why probably also Helvetas Intercooperation that is seeking accreditation has not seen a very speedy progress is that there is no accreditation strategy. So there again, if you don't have a strategy, it's difficult to agree on where the journey goes. I would leave it at this point and then take any question and maybe give more details in my answers. Over.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the group? Yes, Nikolai?
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan. Apart from refilling the GCF, does Switzerland have its strategy of reform, or let's say softer, of a direction in which Switzerland would like to somehow push GCF secretariat and GCF routines and procedures and setup?
Good, thank you. Should I answer question by question, or do you want to bundle them?
It's okay. You can answer.
Okay. Okay, I take it. Well, thank you, Nikolai. We do not have a strategy per se, but of course, when we asked for the 150 million, we had to write a proposal to the government. It includes the objectives that we have, and in each of the board meetings that we have positions that we agree. And from time to time, there's possibilities to comment, to make submissions on important policy documents, such as accreditation strategy back in, I think it was 2017 that we submitted some ideas on that, but also private sector strategies and others. And we try to be coherent on, from the high level, the points that I wasn't reading out in detail, but you will find them in the presentation. So yes, I think we have a strategy, and we try to be coherent and consistent over the years. Over.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't. I think that no one else has a question. I don't see anyone raising their hand. Oh, Jörg, do you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's allowed if I ask a question too.
Sure it is. Yeah, fine.
Sorry, no, I don't have two questions, so it doesn't go away. So I only have one. Apart from Helvetas, are you aware of any other Swiss organizations going for accreditation right now? Maybe this is not appropriate for a question because there may be some sensitivities there and secrecy and so on, but you choose how to answer.
No, I'm not aware of any like that. But you touch on a topic that is actually an interesting one, because it's the transparency of the pipeline, and that applies to organizations that are seeking accreditation, but also to projects. You don't know exactly where you have to line up and where you have to take what type of ticket in order to move forward. But I'm not aware of any Swiss organization that is considering to be accredited. And I don't discourage anybody, but it needs a healthy dose of realism and stamina. Realism in a way that the GCF board, or at least a big chunk of them, is not necessarily looking for organizations from developed countries to come in, unless you are you're a niche player in something very specific. And I don't know, you have some experience with microfinance and bundling and mobilizing the private sector, then perhaps you have a chance to get in the speedy way. And all the others seem to be waiting out there. And the question then is, how can you enter the game? I say the game and some accessing some of the funds of the GCF in a different way than by becoming an accredited entity. And there it is perhaps interesting to see an early version, I would say, call it the pre-accreditation strategy, has some ideas like a simplified or a limited project-specific accreditation rather than a full-fledged accreditation, because the board and the secretariat in particular became aware of the fact that asking all the organizations, and some of which could certainly be very beneficial for the mission of the GCF, if you make them wait until they are fully accredited, you waste a lot of resources on all sides. Needless to say, probably Helvetas could share, and unfortunately I wasn't able to hear that part of the seminar this afternoon. You could share a lot of how difficult it is, the back and forth and the paperwork, but you can imagine if you are a small fund in a developing country that has probably only a track record of 4 or 5 years. Documents are only in Spanish or Portuguese or French, and all the documents have to be translated, explained, and whatever into English, so that the accreditation panel and the committee can then look at it and make a recommendation to the board and so on. So this is a very cumbersome process, and sometimes not really worthwhile. If there would be other softer, easier ways to bring the knowledge and the network that organizations have into the game and into fruition without being fully accredited entities. Over.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting information that you just shared. Maya, do you have a...
Yeah, I would have a follow-up question to that, because I remember that probably 1 year or more ago, that was proposed and discussed at the GCF board, that there would be the possibility, for example, to get accredited for one project only. And it was sort of foreseen for especially for the private sector entities interested in implementing projects that were already ready to go. And at that stage, I remember that it was decided not to do that. So is there really like a strategy now to take up this possibility again?
Thank you. Some people still believe that it would be a good idea. Some others are opposed to it for a variety of reasons. So as long as we do not have a full strategy, and actually in a decision from, I think it was September 2018 on the subject of accreditation, the board took a decision to have an analysis of the current landscape of accredited entities and how far they cover all the needs, not just geographically, but also thematically, and you name it. In 2020, I have not seen that analysis, just because things have not moved, and don't blame COVID because of that. But you can any time get back to Antonia or myself, and we can continue discussion bilaterally on the phone. I have not followed up specifically on that one. I have not heard of anything. I have not seen anything in the latest documents that were circulated for last week's GCF board meeting. Over. I think we soon reach time.
Thank you very much.
Kids need to be picked up.
If there is nothing else very super urgent, I would like to close this exchange meeting. I would like to thank all of you for participating, and I would like to especially thank Maya Wolfensberger, Nikolai Denisov, Jörg Klarer, and Stefan Schwager for sharing their experience this afternoon. It's been extremely interesting. And we're looking forward to see where this journey with the Green Climate Fund goes, and are excited to hear if Helvetas gets accredited, or if anyone wins a proposal, or any other news from the group. So I wish you a very nice afternoon. All the best, stay safe, and see you again soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.